The Japanese have this saying, give a man fish, do for a man podcast, and you've done for them one podcast. Teach a man how to podcast, and they can podcast forever. And because the world is not going to go with advertising. Advertising is here to stay. But what is that advertising that's more wholesome, right? That actually has value to the person you're advertising to.
For other brands, for a brand there, what's the value we are giving? Say a company like MTN watches this podcast. Is the intention for them to replicate this same thing in MTN?
And instead of paying, say, Kasuku, to say, hey, within like 1 second, say, hey, Bane, don't forget to use Colgate to brush your teeth. What if Colgate started the Colgate Dental Health Podcast? And in this vast audience, they are going to find influencers they've not hired, right? So if someone watches a short clip from your podcast and they share it, they are advertising for you. The goal is to find the soul of your company with podcasting, right? Welcome to the Uvotam Podcast. In this podcast, we are going to attempt to reimagine what it means to advertise and what it means to do podcasts. At Uvotam, our main business is podcasting. And because of the nature of our clients and because of the diversity of their businesses, we've picked up on a major insight about how podcasting can help businesses, it can help brands, it can help influencers grow their platforms, grow their communities, but even more importantly, find the soul of their businesses, find the soul of their companies, know the story they're trying to tell out there in the world, and even hopefully turn their businesses into a story. We believe that podcasting, by its nature, by its conversational nature, is the easiest way to naturally express yourself. According to some research on the internet, most people who listen to podcasts claim that the reason they listen to podcasts is because they feel like they're participating in a conversation among other smart friends. And we believe that because of this, bringing this kind of relationship with your audience into your business will result into more trusting customers. It will even result into more trusting employees, but even for you, the entrepreneur or the leader of marketing or the influencer, it will allow you to reflect significantly on the story that you want to tell about your business. It will allow you to reflect significantly on the values of your business, on what exactly you want to communicate out there to the world, and what exactly you want to build within your business. In this podcast, I'll be your host, Kenneth, and with me will be Mark, the co-host. And we are going to go and explore together what it means to turn Uvotam, which is our podcasting business, into a story. But instead of trying to convince you that this approach actually works, we wanted to bring you along, wanted to experiment with you. The initial step for us is going to be to turn our business into a story through this podcast, where we'll take you through what we do, how we do it, what tools we use, what skill sets we need, how we relate with our customers, how we retain them, what happens when we get challenges, what happens when customers are disappointed with the work we give them, and how we celebrate our wins. This is what this podcast is going to be about. And the goal perhaps is to convince you as well to start your own podcast for your business, to share the story that is your business to the rest of the world in order to build a community that you can sustain. A big part of podcasting versus other types of advertising is a podcast, if executed well, can be a standalone, self-sustaining form of advertisement. So instead of going out to pay, say, other podcasters or pay TV programs or pay other channels to show 1 minute or 2 minute clips of you convincing people that they should buy your product, people who would be willing to sit in for maybe hours or minutes listening to a podcast that you're producing about your brand specifically are more willing to, first of all, engage with your platform, pay for your products, and also give you the most valuable feedback you'd need to improve your business, to improve your communication, and also to relate with them better. We are going to start this journey by making a clear argument that podcasting is not only just a channel where you can place ads, but it can be an ad in itself. And that is where we're going to start. Please meet my host, Mark. Yes, Mr. Mark.
Yes, Kenneth. Thank you again. So tell us, what do the numbers say about advertising in podcasting?
So yes, according to some of the numbers you can find on the internet, it is most of these numbers, unfortunately, are based on viewership in Europe and America. But because of the trends previously, these numbers are so insightful, even for us here in Uganda, because if you look at other trends like consumption of media, like technology advancements, usually there is a clear correlation between how these technologies grow in the West and how they end up growing in Uganda. So some of the numbers I'm going to share with you are going to be global numbers, but a good amount of those are going to be numbers mostly from the United States, because unfortunately this is the data that we have access to. But I do believe that it has a significant reflection on what the reality is today. So a big part of that is from 2002 to the end of 2004, there is a significant increase in podcasting by over 55%. So most people consume media through podcasting. Yes, so this is the number. And a lot of advertisers who advertise in podcasting versus other means of advertising. If you have, say, an ad in one of the common podcasts, versus an ad on TV, versus an ad, say, on YouTube, on like YouTube ads or Google ads or Facebook ads, most of the advertisers claim that their return on investment, their return per ad, per payment on an ad, is significantly more by over 90% on podcasting. Yeah, and the trick also between that is when you run an ad on say one of the most common podcasts in the world is the Joe Rogan podcast. If you run an ad on the Joe Rogan podcast and you have a special voice actor read out this ad, if they split the Joe Rogan podcast episode in the middle and you have like Denzel Washington run an ad, hey, buy my toothpaste, blah, blah, blah. What the data shows that less people find that ad compelling compared to if Joe Rogan himself reads out the ad for you. Yes. Again, the science here or the assumptions that people are making is that because Joe Rogan has already cultivated that trust, if he's able to use that same trust to communicate the message you've paid him to communicate, it has a bigger impact because it comes with that trust as well, right? So that is what the numbers say. Right now, podcasts are already showing that the impact of advertising within podcasts is significantly bigger than advertising from any other channel. It shows that if you're using the host to read the actual ads, chances of your returns are significantly bigger as well compared to if you hired a voice actor or if you designed a studio ad like you would traditionally do. Yes. But now here are some of the challenges, again, that come with this, right? If you run an ad, say Joe Rogan today, again, let's use Joe Rogan in a hypothetical example because, again, this is the biggest podcast in the world, right? Say we hired Joe Rogan as Uvotam to read our ads. And then tomorrow, let's use another example. Let's say PDD had the podcast, right? And then we used PDD.
I don't think Puff is the right example you want to use.
Yeah, no, he's the right example, yeah. Yeah, and we had PDD run our ads, at the peak of his fame. He will help us get the audience. But the issue is, if PDD with the scandals he has right now, whether guilty or not, if these scandals happened with his voice out there in the world, reading for our products, that affects our brand, right? So this is the same thing. I don't think, obviously, the PDD thing is going to happen to Joe Rogan, but this is a risk you're taking as a business if you're trusting an influencer somewhere else or you're trusting a podcaster somewhere else to carry your brand for you. Because as I've mentioned, there is a very big impact when the host reads the ad themselves because that impact comes from trust. So that means you're also taking that risk of the trust that produce this impact, also destroying your brand because you use that same podcaster to read your ad in case there's a scandal with that podcaster. Of course, that's a risk you have to take, right? which again, if you look at the other channels, if you're running an ad, say with an actor, usually an actor no one knows, a voice actor that isn't known, if you're using that actor to run an ad, what happens is, if that actor has a scandal, but no one will ever know, right? You can just pull down the ad, and over time, it can be okay that maybe there was a small scandal that affected your brand. But if it's a big name, again, PDD would come in as a very big example. If it's a big name like PDD, your brand is going to suffer as long as the scandal exists, yes. And some scandals exist forever. If you look at, say, again, a lot of famous people, and I'm using famous people here because it's famous people that do these podcasts that happen to be very successful with these podcasts. And what we are trying to do here at Uvotam, and what we are trying to also maybe try to convince the rest of the business people out there, is that you as a business, you as Uvotam, you can start your own podcast, right? It is not hard. It is, if you partner with us, for example, we can help you structure the story, structure the narrative. We can help you with the production because you are so experienced in this. But we give the control of the narrative onto you. The one person in the universe who can hurt your brand through advertising is going to be you getting into the same scandal. You understand?
So help me understand how then advertising is self-sustaining through podcasting.
So most people think of podcasting as a side hustle, right? So I'm a programmer, a full-time job. When I get some time over the weekend, if I'm not taking care of my kids, I call you and we can say a lot of things we want to say. We get things off our chest and speak into the mics. And this is good. This is ideally why people listen to podcasts. It seems there is an aversion towards more programmed, more overly prepared content on the internet. Yeah, people want to experience the rawness of others, and podcasting is one of those channels where you can do that very well, right? Now, if you're doing this well as a company, right? If Uvotam does this well, in this podcast, we are going to be talking about our podcasting business, right? So we are not only going to be talking about how podcasts are done, we are going to take you through the journey of production, post-production, and so on. So this podcast, we are targeting people who maybe want to learn how to edit podcasts. We won't tell you about the AI right now. There are tools maybe like DaVinci Resolve has now tools that can automatically edit some podcasts to some extent. People who maybe don't have a lot of insight about what the trends in technology are when it comes to creating podcasts. Those are people we are targeting, right? But if these people start watching our podcast and they feel like they're learning something, we are going to retain these people as audiences, right? So these are not people, ideally, most of them may not be people ideally who are going to hire Uvotam to create a podcast, but there are people who are going to...
Interested in learning.
Yes, who are interested in learning, either to start their own podcasting, their own small-scale podcasting, or even to compete with us, right? So they would be interested in learning, okay, how many people do I need to set up, to have a picture that looks as clear as the Uvotam picture, right? How many lights, what's the minimum amount of investment I need to have a production that's as neat as the Uvotam production, right? So these could be our own competitors. But we are relying on the fact that if our content is engaging enough, we are going to get feedback from them. Some of these people are going to disagree with us. When we say, make sure you have your client review your podcast at least twice before you publish it and something like that, we are going to have people who have different experiences who say, no, I want to have the creative control if the client pays me, and the client to trust me, and things like that. And that is going to be a source of actual trusted feedback. You understand? It's going to be a source of actual trusted feedback that we can also start incorporating, that will give us insight into those moments when we feel like we are not communicating clearly with our clients because we don't understand each other. This feedback from the community that we're trying to build with this podcast is going to help us communicate and streamline our business better. So that's one big goal. The other big goal is, again, as you know, in the media business, if someone already has their business and they don't think it's a worthy investment, because part of, again, telling you about Uvotam business, the Uvotam podcasting business, is also that we're going to tell you about the business part. We're going to tell you about how to acquire customers. We're going to tell you about how you can retain customers. We are going to tell you how you can mitigate conflicts. Exactly, yeah. Things like that. We are going to tell you about all those things, right? So the idea here is, if you find if people who have come on to learn, to get some of the business wisdom from our experience, if some of these people choose that to start a podcast on their own and they're not willing to invest into all the equipment and all the technical expertise that's required, chances are very high that they'll consider us, right? Chances are very high that they'll consider us. So that is one big part of why this is important. And like I'm using Uvotam right now as an example because we are doing this, but I want you to think of a company like Colgate. Let's give Colgate a free ad in this first episode, right? Think of a company like Colgate. So Colgate, what if instead of paying, they advertise a lot. I think it's a Unilever brand or something like that, right? And instead of paying, say, Kasuku, to say, hey, within like 1 second, say, hey, man, don't forget to use Colgate to brush your teeth. What if Colgate started a podcast about dental health? Right? What if Colgate started the Colgate Dental Health Podcast? It's a branded Colgate podcast where they bring experts to tell you how, keeping your teeth clean is healthy, how, it's a spiritual experience, whatever they know about teeth that we don't know.
How
right?
all the ingredients in the product,
exactly.
what their effect is on your body.
Also debunking some of the conspiracy theories, maybe around fluorine, things like that, right? If they started a podcast that does that, they're not everyone brushes their teeth, right? But they're going to attract people who are interested in dental facts, right? Because there are so many people. They'll be attracting doctors who are interested in dental facts. They'll be attracting business people who would be interested in trends around what people find interesting in the dental field and so on and so forth. And in this vast audience, they're going to find influencers they've not hired, right? So if someone watches a short clip from your podcast and they share it, they are advertising for you, right? Yes. So this is part of what I'm explaining.
And they're just sharing it in form of them just sharing knowledge they like.
This had a very good impression on me. I think you'll find it interesting. Then you share with your wife. If say I listen to a Colgate podcast that says maybe for kids 3 years and younger, you should use the children's toothpaste because of this and this and this. I'm like, oh, actually, for us, we've been using the normal Colgate to give our kids. And then you send to your wife. Colgate has now used me as a vessel to advertise for him. And this is free. This is self-sustaining. As long as Colgate is able to keep up with producing content that people find interesting, they'll always be able to retain an audience. And as long as they have an audience, they reach a place, they can even monetize a Colgate podcast that is about Colgate and use that money to pay the marketing people who are actually talking this podcast. You understand, right? While at the same time controlling the narrative themselves, knowing that, okay, this is my business's podcast, so maybe the marketing head reviews every episode before it goes out to make sure that nothing is shared within that podcast that is off brand. You understand, right? Because again, the trick with hiring, say, another podcaster, right? So let's say Kasuku, because Kasuku is closer to our home, right? So you give Kasuku money to say your podcast, which is, rather to say your ad in his podcast, yeah? Which is something that you'd want because Kasuku has a big audience, right? But then, in between that, what if Kasuku has a disagreement with Bobby Wine, right? He will say, ne Bobby Wine yantama, before he airs out your podcast, right? The viewer who's watching this is always going to consider your brand with the hate of Bobby Wine, right? And I'm not saying Kasuku hates Bobby Wine. I'm just giving this hypothetical. I know Kasuku doesn't hate Bobby Wine, right? But again, this can be bigger. It could be politics, which is very sensitive here, but it could be something else. It could be maybe because recently this priest, the pastor Lubega of Fanero, did a fundraiser, yeah, which attracted a lot of controversy on the internet, right?
$55 million.
Yes. So this thing, a podcaster could find it also controversial. They would like to comment on that. They say, you know what? That's the point of podcasts. Podcast is to share these diverse opinions, right? It's not controlled media where, on NTV, the owner of NTV will say, no, we have a big audience from this church. Don't say anything about this church, yeah? But the beauty about podcasting is it allows for this diversity. Everyone can share their opinions the way they think, right? But the problem now is for you, the brand, if you have an association with this person, and then they go on their podcast, and even if it's an honest opinion and they share an opinion that's offensive, right? It's going to come off as if you're endorsing this offense, yes, and you may be hurt in that constituency. You may be hurt among the category of people that have been offended. You understand? And this is a risk you have to take, right? Because again, you have to balance getting an audience. Because most people, if Kasuku, for example, Kasuku has a big audience, again, it's controversialness, right? I think a lot of big brands, you don't see Coca-Cola advertising on local podcasts, for example, because they're scared of that, right? These are brands that want to be neutral and they want to control their narrative so strictly that they don't want to risk advertising on Kasuku, even if they have the money to do that and they know that Kasuku has the audience that they want, because they're worried about that, right?
So you're saying in this case, if a company X starts their own podcast, they're in position to control everything that is said on that podcast. So,
yeah, that's the tricky part is, again, if you make it over-controlled, then it's going to sound like an ad and people won't come, yeah? So the thing is, you want to, the example I gave about Colgate, right? Okay, no, let me give you a better example, right? Think about hospitals today, right? When COVID started, I stay in Chanja. On Ring Road, they started building the St. Peter's Hospital. Yeah, so it's a one building, hospital, one building. It was a nice hospital. Today, the bank closed it down, right? So I think they defaulted on the loan or something. I don't know what happened, but the hospital was closed down and the bank labeled that it's for sale, bank closure and stuff like that. One thing that the hospital didn't know, because again, next to that hospital was Haji something who sells herbals, right? With his cavern, so Haji Bichi would put his mic on and promise to cure people of what? Of gonorrhea and things like that. And now, the guy who runs St. Peter's Hospital doesn't know that Haji Bichi is his competitor. You understand? And even if they knew, they don't know how to craft their story in a way where they can assure the guy who has gonorrhea that you have higher chances of being treated, or at least equal chances of being treated here. And I'm also regulated by these ones, also called institutions that make sure that my product is of quality rather than going to the Haji. They don't have that channel. The only way they can advertise is if they paid a TV station to say, come to, if you're in Chanja and you're sick, come to. They don't have enough time to tell their story clearly, right? This hospital, though, could start their own podcast. And this podcast, one episode would be about does Habo work?
And exactly,
yes. And they would give actual facts about what Habo is and, when it's important to use Habo, when you can use Habo and actual pharmaceutical, stuff like that, right? And in this, they don't even have to ever tell you come to St. Peter's. But you're watching this podcast and it's branded the St. Peter's Medical Podcast. So the impression is if they convince you in any way, you're going to go to St. Peter's to what? To buy medicine from them. And this can be any company, right? We don't know, for example, for us right now, our good friend Mose is a big competitor, right? But we want to make sure that if you're a big company, if you're MTN and you want a podcast, you want to start your own podcast, instead of hiring an individual, and again, I'm throwing shade to my very good friend Mose, but instead of hiring an individual like Mose, come to Uvotam, where we have, we are compliant, we are tax compliant, we are a serious company that has returns and things like that, the things that matter to other businesses, so you can file and claim that you paid Uvotam this amount of money, and you can write that off your tax for sure, and you can pass your audit because it's visible through the tax statements and so on and so forth. And that is the argument we are making is, now for us would be that we could ignore these individual influencers, but they're our competitors. So part of running you through our business within this podcast is we have the space to actually tell you, hey, do you know why? Do you know when is a good time to hire Mose? If you start up, you have a small restaurant and you need a very creative individual and you want to hire one man, obviously, by all means, I think Mose would be a better option for you than hiring Uvotam. But if you're a big institution that has all these regulations that cover you, that has all this big risk to your brand, if you don't do the right thing, then hiring a similar institution would be the better choice for you, because we are also within the same umbrella. We will find the regulations. We'll make sure we have like a redundant people on our team whose job is to make sure that we meet those extra regulations that one individual can do, right? So this is a thing that we have no way of fixing in any ad. If we paid if we paid Kasuku to talk about us for 1 minute or to put a banner under his podcast about Uvotam, he will not be able to express this clearly in a way that a big company would understand. Our exact target customer would understand. But us starting this podcast is hopefully going to show them, as we go on going in the future episode by episode, is going to show them that this is how we approach marketing. This is not just us sharing, which is also important, us sharing our story and letting the world know that this is our opinion, this is why we started Uvotam, this is what we want our impact on the world to be, and so on and so forth. This is how it feels to work at Uvotam, so that we are targeting people we want to employ and things like that. But even more than that, we want these companies we want other people to know that this is an actual avenue of advertising within itself. And it's not so expensive to start, and it's safe. It's a safe mode of advertising where you, as the advertiser, control the narrative for the content you want to create, but also you're sharing information that's useful out there in the world.
I see. So basically, just by someone who tunes in and listens to all these experiences and stories we are sharing, they build the trust that, okay, if these people are mentioning on all these issues and I am dealing with them, maybe if I wanted to start a podcast and I had issues with sound, but there's an episode on sound, I'd rather trust Uvotam to handle my sound. Or maybe in the future we would, offset a few services where we teach other people who have bought their own equipment and stuff like that.
Again, the thing is, the podcast we are going to be sharing, for example, when we talk about like the actual skill set and equipment we use, we want to share with you so you can start your own podcast. Yeah, we are not threatened by individuals starting. Actually, we prefer a world where people have the skills to build. Yeah, we believe that we have the capacity to outcompete you. Right, that is the thing. But then our target is that person who is doing other things. If you're in medicine, you're not going to
learn camera work.
Learn camera work. That is what we believe, right? Yes. And if you can hire someone who has learned from us, that's good. Preferably you hire us though, right? But that is the goal, is preferably you hire us. But we are not particularly, it's not going to be like, we are not trying to advertise directly to convince you to consider Uvotam, which is the form of advertising we are trying to go against, right? We are trying to create, because the world is not going to go with advertising. Advertising is here to stay. But what is that advertising that's more wholesome, right? That actually has value to the person you're advertising to. We are advertising our business, but how do we make our adverts wholesome enough that we can actually teach you? If you're not our target client, what you get away from listening to this podcast is you can start using mics, you can know what is the starter camera to buy, you can know where to buy this equipment from, things like that.
So within the stories and experiences we are going to sell through the various episodes we're going to have on the podcast, that is where someone listening would pick what they would want from us, as opposed to, just sitting down here and selling to people that, hey, come, we do camera work, we do photography, but because we are going to share about, interactions with weddings and what has been the best sets, what we do, sightseeing, all that goes into the preparation of a wedding for a photographer, someone will gain the trust to have us, as rather just listening that, hey, you guys, we do photography. No, but would have built up in their mind what it takes.
Yes,
what
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to have a podcast, an episode where I say we are targeting wedding photographers, right? Where we are sharing experiences on wedding photography, where we are sharing our experiences working with wedding clients, where we are sharing, there are a lot of things, insecurities around not being sure whether your work is actually good enough when you're in post-production and things like that. So we are going to have an episode that's focusing on that, right? And then we'll have an episode that talks about business acquisition, where you send proposals and people don't respond, people call you to pitch, and then you see them hiring another person to do your exact idea. We are going to talk about all those things. And the idea is, our goal obviously is to get our brand, people more aware of our brand. But the idea out of the podcast is hopefully that even those people who won't be in place to hire us, they are in a very good position
To recommend us.
either recommend us, that's one thing, but they're in a very good position to start to kick off their life. Yes, the Japanese have this saying, give a man fish, do for a man podcast, and you've done for them one podcast. Teach a man how to podcast, and they can podcast forever. And that is what we are trying to do. We are going to bring you into our lives. We are showing you how we do the podcast, and it will be up to you to either do the podcast yourself or to call us to be your partner doing this podcast.
All right. So for other brands, for a brand there, what's the value we are giving, say a company like MTN watches this podcast? Is the intention for them to replicate this same thing in MTN, where they get people at MTN talk about MTN services as opposed to just selling the services and running ads? Is that like the vision?
So the goal is, as I said with Colgate, the goal is to find the soul of your company with podcasting, right? So for Colgate, the soul is to solve dental issues, right? So I think the most ideal for them would be to start a podcast exploring dental health, right? Yes, and within that, they will see how to place their products better, right? Yes, for MTN, their goal is to communicate the nation, rather to connect the nation through communication, facilitate sending of money easily and things like that. And they could start a podcast that explores that field, explores how people use money, for example, how people save, they could start a podcast around saving, micro saving and things like that. And through that, they can place the specific MTN products that target those things. But the intention, again, of podcasting is not that direct podcasting, I have this thing, buy it from me, because that usually turns people off. It's to share wisdom. Is we know this about the world and want you also to know about it. And by the way, we've created some solutions around the specific thing we are sharing. That is what we think that is.
Interesting. I totally feel like it would be it's going to be such a grand thing, because ideally people also buy into people. And since the podcast has us speaking about our lived experiences, it's easier for anyone to, just be attracted to that. Oh, that this photographer faced this kind of issues, and maybe they would want to work with you. Even other photographers can, partner with us because of the experiences we'll share, and they'll be like, okay, this was handled better. This is such a big project, I could not handle it alone. But seeing as it's a shared experience on the Uvotam podcast, then they can come in for like advice, or even just partner with us and give us the whole project so that we do it as a team. So does that also mean that us as the people working here are going to be turned into influencers?
Yes. So
for the services?
Yeah. So a big part again is depending on what story you want to tell, for us here at Uvotam, we're also going to try and convince the people we work with that they made the right choice with their life to come and work with us, right? So a big part, episodes in the future are going to talk about employment at Uvotam and why we make the decisions we make around employment, why we are so flexible, why we accept people to partner, why we accept people to have side gigs openly, things like that, right? So we are going to open up about that, and the target of this obviously is going to be our employees, why you guys made the right decision to come and work here. But also for other people who work elsewhere, like business leaders and so on and so forth, we are going to show them how this helps us work, so maybe they can also treat the employees the same way, right? So, they can be more flexible with their employees, so they can sort of get copy a bit from our employment values. And again, the idea is not to sell these employment values. We don't want the whole world to employ people. They will employ people, but we are going to share how we do that. And for people who agree with us, maybe they can pick a leaf. And people who don't agree, this is a good time for feedback. This is where people say, hey, I have my employee. I told him you can come anytime you want. The guy never came back. So we learn that. So we can know, hey, the guy, Martin, who never comes in, is like this employee. And then we ask the guy, what did you do? The guy tells us we fired him. We're like, okay, Martin, it's time for you to go. Because that's the feedback we've got. You understand? So part of the podcast is to also get genuine feedback. Feedback you'd not get as a business from an audience that actually trusts you, that you've cultivated and turned into a community.
Yeah, pretty much excited, because basically this type of business also is tailored on project per project, right? It's type of funding comes in through a project, so it will be quite interesting to share experiences on different projects and how they look like, so that even a client in the future who wants to give you a gig understands how it is being handled, right? Yeah. So they basically, I'm pretty much excited for this.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark, for co-hosting this with me. And hopefully for you out there, this is insightful. This is a valuable way to spend your time watching and listening to us, and maybe coming back for the next episodes when you publish them. Thank you very much.